The prairie was wide and endless, yet Caleb Ryder carried a loneliness that made it feel like a prison. He was 30 years old, strong in frame and rich in cattle, with a kind of weather-creased face that told of long days beneath a punishing sun. But wealth had never cured the emptiness behind his eyes. Once, he had been promised a future filled with laughter in a home of his own, but betrayal had cut him deep, and since then his days stretched in a quiet monotony of chores and nights broken by silence so thick he could hear his own heartbeat echo in the rafters. He rarely rode into town except for supplies, for every tavern lamp seemed to throw his shadow longer, and every whispered glance reminded him of what he had lost. It was near dusk when the air shifted, carrying with it a strange hush that made even his horse twitch its ears. The forest pressed close to the edge of his land, a dark wall where the prairie grasses surrendered to pine. Caleb rode there to clear his mind or perhaps to escape it. The cicadas hummed their ancient chorus, and the wind brushed against the fence posts like a ghostly hand. He thought himself alone, but his gut told him otherwise. The underbrush quivered in a way no breeze could stir. He halted, every sense sharpened, his hand drifting toward the rifle at his saddle. What emerged from the trees was not a threat in the form he expected. A young woman stood there, still as stone yet alive with a quiet, guarded energy. She wore doeskin that blended with the earth itself, her dark hair braided with care, her eyes catching what little light remained. Caleb had seen Apache people before from afar, though never so close, never alone. He was struck first not by her beauty, though it was undeniable, but by the sorrow that seemed woven into her very posture. His heart, long dulled, gave an unfamiliar stir. Neither moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Caleb's fingers hovered near the rifle, but he could not raise it. Something in her gaze forbade violence. She watched him with the alertness of a deer ready to flee, but there was also something else there. Weariness, perhaps hunger, perhaps fear. The distance between them was only a few yards, yet it felt like a chasm carved by centuries of mistrust. Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but no words arrived. The moment stretched, thick with questions that neither dared voice. Then, as swiftly as a candle snuffed by wind, she slipped back into the trees. Only the faintest impression of her presence lingered, the soft crackle of leaves where her feet had pressed. Caleb sat frozen in his saddle, pulse racing, his loneliness pierced in a way he did not understand. That night he barely slept. The image of her eyes haunted him, not as temptation but as mystery. By morning his resolve had shifted. Against reason, against the whispered warnings of townsfolk that rang in memory, he returned to the forest. He carried with him a small bundle, bread, dried meat, and an apple from his kitchen. He placed it upon a flat stone near the edge of the trees, then turned away, leaving it without waiting for thanks or proof she would come. As he walked back to his horse, he felt the heat of his own shame. Why was he doing this? Why risk the cruel talk of his neighbors, who already saw him as a man hollowed out and half-mad from solitude? The next day he returned. The bundle was gone. In its place lay a single feather, black tipped with silver. Caleb picked it up slowly, his breath catching. It was not merely a token but a message, seen, acknowledged, perhaps even accepted. He felt something shift within him, a stir of life he had not known in years. Compelled, he ventured deeper. The ground grew soft with pine needles, and he noticed the delicate trace of a footprint leading further in, small, light, unmistakably hers. His instincts told him to stop, to turn back, yet his heart pulled forward. Each step felt like trespass, yet also like pursuit of something that had called to him from beyond the veil of his own sorrow. He did not find her that day, but he left another bundle, this time with a scrap of cloth wrapped around the food. He imagined her fingers unwrapping it, imagined her expression softening. The thought was enough to carry him through the week. When the storm came, it caught him unprepared. The sky bruised with sudden clouds, thunder rolling across the plains like the hoofbeats of 1,000 unseen horses. Rain fell heavy, stinging against his skin as he sought shelter. It was then, stumbling beneath a rock outcropping, that he found her again. She was crouched there already, arms wrapped tight around herself, her hair wet and clinging to her face. For a heartbeat he thought she might vanish again, but the rain pinned them both in place. They did not speak. Words seemed a fragile thing against the roar of water. Instead, Caleb removed his coat and draped it gently across her shoulders. For the first time she did not recoil. The silence between them was no longer sharp with suspicion but softened, tentative, like the hush before dawn. He noticed then a scar along her arm, old but jagged, and his chest ached with questions. He did not ask them. He only sat beside her, listening to the storm sing its wild hymn. When the thunder cracked loud, she flinched and, almost without realizing, pressed closer to him. Caleb held still, his breath slow, as though any sudden movement might shatter the fragile trust forming in the shadows. But storms pass, and with them peace is always fleeting. Word spread in town before long. Some claimed they had seen Caleb at the forest's edge, lingering where no honest man lingered. Others whispered sharper tales, that he was consorting with danger, with savagery, betraying the blood of his own people. At the tavern, the murmurs thickened, carrying with them a heat that burned against his back. Caleb sat alone, hat pulled low, hearing their boots thump and their laughter sharpen like knives. He had endured gossip before, but now each word cut deeper, for it was not only his name they sullied, it was hers. He left the tavern with a jaw set hard, heart pounding. Shame and rage mingled within him, but beneath them pulsed a truth he could no longer deny. He cared for her, not as a fleeting curiosity, but as someone whose presence had begun to stitch together the torn edges of his heart. Still, what future could such a bond hold? He was a rancher with land and reputation to lose. She was a woman carrying scars, mistrust, and the weight of a world that condemned them both for daring to share silence beneath a storm. That night he returned to the forest, guided not by reason but by something older, fiercer. He found her near a fire, gathering her few belongings, preparing to leave. Her face was a mask of resignation, though her eyes betrayed a sadness so deep it threatened to undo him. She believed herself a danger to him, he realized. She believed his kindness had been a mistake, one he would come to regret if she stayed. Caleb stepped forward, every word he wished to say caught in his throat. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver locket, the last thing of his mother's he had kept. It was the only possession he held with true sentiment, a reminder of gentler times. He knelt and held it out, an offering without explanation. His hands trembled not from fear but from the weight of what the gesture meant, that he was placing trust, dignity, and hope in her keeping. Ayana's breath faltered. For the first time she spoke her name aloud, voice soft yet steady, Ayana. The sound of it settled over him like a blessing. She reached out, fingers brushing the locket, hesitant but resolute. When she took it, Caleb felt something within him break free, as though chains he had carried for years dissolved in the space between their joined hands. The fire flickered, painting her face in amber glow, her eyes reflecting both uncertainty and courage. She had not promised him anything, nor had he demanded it. Yet in that exchange something irrevocable had shifted. They were no longer two solitary souls colliding by chance. They were bound, fragile yet undeniable, by the courage to trust despite the world's scorn. Outside the storm had cleared. Dawn was rising, its golden light threading through the trees. Caleb and Ayana stepped from the shelter into that tender glow, their steps slow but steady. They did not know what trials awaited them, whether the town would shun him, whether her people would accept him, whether the land itself would test their resolve. But in that moment they walked side by side, no longer alone, carrying with them the quiet certainty that broken hearts can be mended not by safety, but by the risk of love. And if you listen close, dear soul, you may hear the lesson their story leaves behind, that the heart's truest strength is not found in solitude or pride, but in the fragile, defiant act of reaching across the chasm of fear toward another. Perhaps, then, love is not the thunder that shakes the sky, but the stillness that follows, when two hearts choose to remain in its quiet.